You have it. I can.
Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction. And with us tonight, we have Kimberly Rae, who is our guest, and Molly Jo, our producer extraordinaire. But missing from the cast tonight, you'll notice, is one Alton Gansky, commonly known as Pops. He is currently in the hospital. And by that I mean he's picking up some medication from the pharmacy. But it makes a much better story if I say that he's in the hospital. So he has been delayed. He's fine. Everything is good. He sent me a text earlier tonight. He said I may not be able to make it tonight. I'm at Kaiser, and I immediately texted back, is everything okay? And he goes, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm just picking up some meds, but some sort of mess up in the system. So you understand that. So he is not with us. He will not be joining us tonight. He may pop in the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We'll see. But that's really highly dependent on a lot of things. So he may just watch and enjoy the night off, maybe put his feet up and have some fun. So, but with us tonight, we have Kimberly Rae. And you are the author of several books. Kimberly, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I guess you could say my claim to fame is that I've lived in several countries overseas. We were in missions for a while, so I have rafted the Nile River and hiked at the base of Mount Everest and eaten cow brains and snake and other really weird things that nobody would want to eat.
Ew.
And I've written 20 books now, some fiction, some nonfiction, and I live in North Carolina with my husband and my 2 kids. I like to write about human trafficking and missions, and I like to write suspense and romance and books that make a difference.
Excellent. Yeah, human trafficking. That's where people get caught in traffic. Is that like the Los Angeles?
Only if you're in
stories?
Atlanta, maybe, but.
Okay. I'm a little jealous that you live in North Carolina. So I go out there every time I go out there. Every time I go out there, I think I'm not coming home. I'm just buying a house right now, and I'm not coming home. So. I did want to mention to you, since Pops is not here, to our listeners, that his latest novella, The Fog, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. It doesn't release until October 2nd. Now, that is several weeks ahead of schedule, so he's pretty excited about that and wanted me to let you guys know. This is the 8th novella in the Harbinger series, and so if you've been following that, here's your next step. Make sure that you guys pick that up. And it's a great little series, and so I've read a little bit of this novella, and I think you guys will be very, very pleased with it. So, so some good stuff there. Molly, since my pops isn't here, you're, by the way, welcome to share with us any questions that you have along the way. I don't know if that's. I figured that was clear, but I thought it might make it a little more explicit. So.
Okay, thanks. I'll just jump right in every so often.
Good. Because it's good to hear your voice. So, we do have a little bit of news this week. The long-anticipated return of First Line Fridays is coming back. So this Friday we will have First Line Fridays back. Molly, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Just what you said. We're back with First Line Fridays. So every week on your Facebook page, we're going to post a first line of a chapter or a book. Hey, Quotidian Light just checked in. Hello.
Yay.
And so First Line Fridays, every Friday on your Facebook page through the following Tuesday when we have the podcast, people can leave their first line, one line only, one sentence only, and the best winner, or the best line that week wins. Each month, those will go through a finalist on your blog, on your website, and be picked by popular vote, and the popular vote who picks is going to win a $15 gift card.
Cool.
It sounds so much better when you say it. So much better.
I do what I can.
So, excellent.
And so that's upcoming news, but we have some past news to discuss. Aaron, you had a book signing on Saturday.
I did have a book signing, and it was a huge success for you.
It was a huge success for everybody.
Yeah. I did a book signing at my local Barnes & Noble here in Victorville at Barnes & Noble in the Mall of Victor Valley. And Molly, you'd been hard at work, as well as my wife and several other friends and family, promoting it through social media news, the Facebook, the Twitter, and all of that. And the turnout was tremendous. I brought 41 books, and I hoped to sell out sometime before 6 o'clock. My hope was that if I could sell all of these books, I'd be pretty happy. But if I only sold 20, that's a good day. Barnes & Noble, this particular one, is happy if I sell 10 or 15. But I ended up selling out in almost an hour exactly, to the minute.
Wow.
Did my last signing. So the outpouring of support from old students from from Serrano High School, where I used to work, teachers at my current position at the school where I currently teach, and just friends and family from all walks of life. That really, it was a very humbling experience. It's still, I'm kind of still in that phase where I feel strange signing somebody's book when it's like, well, you're my friend. Like, I don't really. I ended up writing stupid things like, to my friend Matthew Squishy Pants, and just making up stupid stuff. That,
Okay.
maybe that was more than I should have said, but anyhow.
Maybe a little.
But a lot of people, quite a few people I didn't know, and some passerbys that purchased books. So I was excited about that. So it did go well, and I attribute that largely to the work that you did and all of my friends and family on the social media channels. So thank you guys for that. It's kind of a victory for everybody. So I'll send your checks in the mail.
Okay, great. I just want another copy of the book so I can sell that on eBay.
There you go. I'll sign it for you. You can sell it for an extra $1 maybe.
There you go. It was really exciting to be a part of that, because I was talking with the manager, the community relations manager, and he was saying how they generally at Barnes & Noble's, like you said, if they have 10 books sell in 3 hours, that's a good book signing. And you went through 40 in 60 minutes. You had no time to breathe. You couldn't get up. You couldn't move. I mean, people were just constantly right there at your table, and that was so neat to watch. So it was a really neat experience to be a part of. So thank you for letting me be a part of that.
Absolutely. You kept things going. You and Christy Harris, who helped set the thing up, bringing me waters from the Starbucks cafe, etc. And it was intense. It was hard and heavy and fast, and didn't really let up. So it was a lot of fun being able to see a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while. So, but back to the cast. I suppose we should probably talk a little bit about that. My pops is not here, but he did leave a publishing term of the week, and I'm going to do my best to get this properly. And it's D&A, which stands for Delivery and Acceptance. And I'm sure Pops will correct me, and if he does, if I say something incorrect here, we'll correct it on the show notes. But basically, delivery and acceptance is, a lot of times when you're working with a publisher, they'll give you half of an advance up front when you sign the contract, and then they'll save the other half of the advance upon what's called D&A, which is delivery and acceptance. So you actually have to finish the manuscript, and they have to read it and approve of it and say, yes, okay, this meets the needs for the publishing house. You are delivering what you said you would deliver. You are upholding your end of the contract, so here's your other half of the advance. So that's delivery and acceptance. I'm sure he'd have a lot more to say, but that's all I got for you. So, but today, not the publishing term of the day, but I've got something else for you, and that is Kimberly Rae, who, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you sometimes talk about some of these tough subjects. You mentioned earlier, I can't remember if we were on air or not, but you talk a lot about human trafficking, which is a really difficult subject to handle. It's all over the news these days. It's a real important topic that not a lot of people are actually talking about. And so that can cause, I don't want to say problems, but maybe raise some concerns for us as fiction writers. So Kimberly, why don't you just for a minute, what kind of tough subjects do you write about? What other tough subjects have you seen? What do we mean when we talk about these tough subjects?
Well, I think the tough subjects are kind of ones that people are uncomfortable with in general, and not necessarily the kind that you want to read a nonfiction book about. Most people don't want to pick up a book on human trafficking and read the statistics and read the stories, but they might be interested and want to make a difference and want to help. And I find that through a fiction novel, you can actually address things sometimes in an easier way and in a way that makes more of a difference, because people are willing to read a novel in a way that they wouldn't be really willing to read on that topic in general. Other things would be, I write about, for example, one of my heroines is a victim of childhood abuse. And again, you're addressing things that I wouldn't want to write a nonfiction book about. But you can say things in a novel that aren't preachy and that aren't too informative, but you're talking about a person, and people go through things like this. And I find that people want to read stories about real things sometimes, not always, but sometimes you want to read about the harder things, the addictions, the troubled marriages, the things that are tough and that people are dealing with that we love. And how do these stories get worked out? How can God change lives? How can they be part of making a difference?
Absolutely. And there are a ton of topics out there like that, but you mentioned specifically childhood abuse and human trafficking. And, these are conflicts. These are real live conflicts in the news. And what we like to see in fiction is we like to see these characters overcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that's kind of a common theme in your writing? Is that one of the reasons you write about these tough subjects is because you want to bring some hope to people who perhaps might find themselves in the situation or know somebody in the situation?
Definitely, definitely. My idea with the Stolen series was to present human trafficking through the story of one person, and basically to talk about the people that care and make a difference. So instead of getting overwhelmed about 20 million slaves in the world today, people read that and think, I could make a difference in one person, so I think I'm going to get involved. In my newest novel that came out a couple weeks ago, Shredded, that's the one that has the girl who was a victim. The statistics are that 1 out of every 4 women and 1 out of every 6 guys has some history of childhood sexual abuse. And the more I studied, I found out 90% of them are with someone that they knew. And about 60%, the abuser was someone the family trusted. So anytime you look around, pretty much there's probably someone who's got a secret hurt. And they may have never told anyone. And I thought, I want a book that tells women victims and men victims, you're not alone, and this is not who you are. And you can be free from this. This isn't your secret. This isn't your pain. You can move on. You can live your own life. You can be your own person aside of this. This does not define you. And I could write that in a nonfiction book maybe, but I think it's so much better to write it in a story of a woman who wants to be loved and thinks she can't be loved and she can't love. And what happens when someone does start to love her and break through that? How does that turn out? Is there a way to overcome?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting dynamic. I think that focusing on that can be very powerful. You mentioned that you didn't want to do it in nonfiction. You prefer to do it in fiction because, I mean, you've mentioned a few reasons, but I tend to agree with that. I think fiction can really get us to the heart of a truth, can really present the truth in a way that, sadly, the factual truths can't in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Tim O'Brien talks a lot about that in How to Tell a True War Story. And he says, it doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is what seemed to happen, your perception of that. And that's going to get to kind of this core kind of a truth. And I feel a little bit like you might be talking about that handling these difficult topics can, first of all, encourage people to talk about it, increase the awareness of the problem, can help encourage people to get involved, can help them feel, like you said, that they can make a difference. And those are all important things, and it's one thing to read that in an essay or a newspaper article, but when you read that, you read it in a novel, and it's perhaps not as didactic, not as pointed, that can have a really profound impact on your readers. So I'm going to kind of go off the script here a little bit and just ask you, have you seen or heard from your readers about impacts that your writing has had on them?
Yes, that is the reason I keep doing what I do. I had a teenager who wrote me and said, your book changed my life, and she was going to get involved. I had another woman, one of my characters is adopted, and she goes to find her birth parents, and she said, I'm going to be brave enough to go and try and find my birth father, even if he rejects me at this point. I had a woman come up to me a couple weeks ago and tell me that she had been abused as a child, and I was the first person she'd ever told. And, when I hear things like that, I think this is the reason this is the right thing to do, because we are people of stories. We love stories. And we can find ourselves in a character in a story in a way that we won't in an essay, like you're saying, with a bunch of numbers on it. Numbers make us very overwhelmed, and numbers, particularly about the hard subjects, I find are very depressing. And then you think, well, this is too big of a problem. I can't do anything about it. Whereas when you read a story about one person, you think, this is there is power. You can overcome. You can make a difference, whether you're the victim in the story, whether you're the person who helps the victim in the story. It empowers you to go and do the same, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk in as teachers, English teachers, high school English teachers. We talk about ethos, pathos, and logos, which are the appeals that are used in rhetoric and how you can persuade people to action. And logos is logical, a logical argument. So for you, it's the numbers of how many people are suffering from this particular form of abuse, or how many people are the numbers on human trafficking, etc. Now that creates a logical something in the brain where it says, okay, well, logically, this is a problem that needs to be fixed, but we don't feel it. And pathos is really that emotional appeal. So even though it's sometimes the least reliable in terms of nonfiction rhetoric, it is often the most persuasive. If somebody feels something, then they're going to act on that feeling much more quickly than they would if they just simply understand something. There's a difference between understanding something with your mind, understanding something with your heart. There's a difference there, and so that's one reason why it's important to talk about these tough subjects in your fiction. But are there any other reasons other than just kind of having that impact on the reader? Is there something perhaps from a writer standpoint that you've learned from trying to write about these particular topics?
Well, to be honest, it's the reason I got started. Way back before I started writing novels, I had a friend who had something happen to her, and she read Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers, one of my favorite books. And she came to me and told me, this book changed the way I see God. And I remember thinking, that's the kind of books I want to write. I want to write ones that make a difference, that don't just entertain. There's plenty of books out there that just entertain. I want to write something that matters and that changes things. And so as a writer, from my perspective, it's kind of like, if I'm not writing about something that matters, what's the point? There are plenty of other people doing that. There's no need for me to do that. I want to fill a hole. I want to fill a need. I'm not sure if that was the answer to your question or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. I go back to my days in Antioch when the mantra for it seems like from the minute I arrived until I finally took the advice to heart, it seemed like the mantra was write what you fear. Find what it is that you're afraid of.
Okay, yeah.
That fear and write it. Well, for me, that was childhood abuse. Now I need to make a disclaimer. I've never been abused. There's no history of abuse in my family anywhere. But I love my children so dearly that the thought of them ever being hurt by anybody is horrifying. And so for the longest time, I never wrote stories about childhood abuse. I never wrote about kids who came out of child abuse or anything like that, or anybody abusing a child or anything. But I kept hearing that mantra: write what you fear, write what you fear. And for me, it was very simple. It was child abuse. And so I ended up finally writing a story in which there's a scene of child abuse, and it was horrific, just absolutely terrifying. I wrote it, and I don't think I've ever read it since. But I still remember what it was inside of me, what I felt when I wrote that, and I felt like a terrible person, and I felt like a horrible human being. I think it's an important distinction to make here, that just because you write about something doesn't mean that you're necessarily contemplating it. You write about human trafficking, you're not, I'm guessing, you're not actually trafficking humans, are you?
I write about the people who fight human trafficking. We can do a disclaimer there.
Okay. So,
but like you're saying, I've written rescues that I wish I could have done. In one of my books, there's this child, like you're saying. I know about her. I've been praying for her for 2 years, and she's still trafficked. In my book, I rescued her. I wish I could rescue her in real life, and I can't. And so I think as a writer, it's like the way to fix things that you can't fix in real life, maybe. And it's a way to deal with things that maybe you can't deal with in the real world. That's why we read stories. It's a way to read about life being fixed, I guess you could say, in a way. But I like what you said about writing what you fear or writing what you struggle with. For me, those are actually my nonfiction books, the Sick and Tired series, because I got diagnosed with Addison's disease. We had to leave the mission field. I can't have a job outside the home now because I don't function well. I'm a pretty sick puppy. And so I started writing in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep and when I was struggling. Why doesn't God fix it? Why am I this way? What was supposed to have fixed the relationships problems that come with this? And so it was a way to actually face those kind of things and see how to fix them. So it wasn't as much for other people as it was for myself.
Absolutely, and like you say, there's that catharsis as well.
Good word, English teacher.
Thank you. I have a few in my pocket that I pull out from time to time. I just hope I used it accurately. But it can be cathartic. But I think also it makes you a stronger writer when you can tackle something that you don't want to write about and you write about it anyway. For me, there was a definite breakthrough because I not only challenged myself to write about the perspective of the child who was abused, it also forced me to kind of get into the mind of the abuser, which is someplace I never wanted to go, ever. No. But in doing that, I better understand them as characters, and I think because of that, my writing has become stronger. Now, I still don't write about that kind of stuff because it's still difficult, but there was definitely a breakthrough. My writing is different now than it was before I handled that, and I remember specifically the night and what I felt like, and the journey that I felt like I had gone on at the end, and it was emotionally grueling. But I do think that it opened up something in my fiction. So it's not for everybody. You don't have to necessarily write from the point of view of the abuser, but just understand that the people who are abusing are often just as sick as those who are being abused. And I guess that's one thing that we could talk about possibly later is just perhaps our desire to simply vilify these characters and just say they're evil people and there's absolutely no redeeming qualities to them whatsoever. But a lot of times these people are charming. They're persuasive, obviously.
Or victims themselves.
Or victims themselves, and so we need to be able to kind of remember that. So, but we can talk about that a little bit later as we get toward the end of the podcast, because I want to kind of leave people with some of those important things about the writing. But we were mentioned earlier before the cast started. What does publication look like when you're tackling some of these topics? Did you just have publishers knocking on your door saying, I want to publish this immediately? Were they skeptical?
Don't we wish?
Yeah.
With the human trafficking, I found it was a very popular topic. I did have an agent that was extremely interested. I ended up self-publishing it because that was back in 2011 when the topic was first becoming really important. And I realized if I wait for an agent and then wait for a publisher, you're talking a year or two down the road. And it's kind of like Amish fiction. I didn't want to be the 150th book out there about it. I wanted to be in the top 10. So I went ahead and put it out myself. Now, as far as the one that came out a couple weeks ago, that did address basically the stories about now this is going to sound really funny, but it's supposed to be a modern day take on, you know, the story in the Bible where the woman comes in and wipes Jesus' feet with her hair and she cries all over him. Having lived in other cultures, particularly like Muslim cultures and things, that is such a scandalous thing. In Bible times, that was so scandalous. I mean, it'd be scandalous if somebody did it now. And I thought, you know, what if one day I was sitting in church and he was telling that story, and I thought, what if something like that happened now on a larger scale? What would happen? Who would respond like Jesus? Who would respond like the religious leader who was totally mortified? And what would happen to the woman? What happened to her afterwards? And so I got this. I happened to know in my human trafficking travels and whatnot, a woman who was in prostitution for about 20 years. She grew up in a Christian home, and she turned that way, and the Lord delivered her and changed her, and she is a wonderful, godly woman now. But the way she talks has your eyebrows up half the time just because of who she is. She hasn't changed who she is, even though she's changed her lifestyle. And so I just had this I had this imaginary vision in church, and it was hard not to, you know, just laugh, of thinking of a woman like that coming to Christ in a scandalous way, say some little dinky church that's very traditional and very conservative, and she comes in with all her stuff in her arms, her feather boas and her stiletto heels, and she's walking down the aisle, and stuff's falling in the aisle, and everybody's gasping and, you know, horrified, and she throws it all on the altar. And she gets saved, and her life is changed. So that's the main point of the book, is how actually she ends up changing the entire town and the entire church, because it's very clear that she has been set free by the gospel, and she starts following the Bible and realizing the Bible says this, so you should do it. And you find out that everybody that she's around is enslaved by something. Maybe it's the fear of what other people think. Maybe it's their past, like the one girl who has the abuse in her past. Maybe it's, you know, comparing themselves to other people or holding a grudge they've never gotten over. And you find out that the church isn't free like it should be, and she's got this freedom in Christ. And so it kind of forces people to face up to the hypocrisy sometimes, that we look all nice and we act all nice, but we haven't dealt with things. But I I still sit in church sometimes and I imagine that happening, and I crack up.
Yeah, I still remember my conversion experience when I put my feather boas and the stiletto heels on the altar.
No,
I've never
stop
seen it happen in real life, but you know.
Stop now, Aaron. Just stop.
Oh. Is that an overshare? Classic overshare?
Yeah,
Okay.
there are some things that you just don't want to announce publicly, and I think that might have been one of them.
Okay,
Right
well,
about that either.
I never know where that line is. So
It's always behind you.
I finally remembered what you asked about. When we send it out to publishers, one thing my agent mentioned was, you know, the girl that was abused, it was in the church, and the guy was still in the church. And that was the deal, was that people did not, they chose to look the other way from little hints that they should have recognized, and they didn't want it to be a problem, and they didn't want to cause a scandal, and so they never dealt with it. And she was kind of saying that publishers are wary of talking about difficult things in the church. And so I finally just did that one myself as well, because it was a message I wanted to get to the world, and I believe God wanted me to get to the world. So if you're writing about a tough subject, you may just have to accept that it's going to be yours, and yet the book has, it's making a difference. And so that's fine with me, you know.
I would have been very interested to see if you had pitched that to a secular publisher, what they would have said.
No, didn't even bother.
You know, sometimes they're a lot more willing to pick that kind of stuff up. But that would have been interesting. But anyhow,
I think it didn't have enough. It wouldn't have enough of the stuff they would be looking for. There's no trash in it. There's no language. There's no the stuff you would think there would be with a story about a prostitute. It doesn't go there.
Right.
I want to interrupt and just say that I've been listening to you, and I think that's really remarkable what you talk about and what you've done to get those stories out there. That you're talking about hard topics, and yet you're going about it with it being difficult to publish that kind of stuff, but you're still finding a way to get it done, and I think that's really remarkable.
Thank you. That's one thing I love about being able to self-publish these days. You know, 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been a possibility, and I would have just had my little book, and there it would have been. And I'm very grateful for, you know, Amazon and the self-publishing world. You can complain about it. You know, there's stuff that's not good, but I'm very glad for it, because if you do have a message you really think God wants to give the world, then you can get it out there. And it's very cool to me that, like I mentioned, we had to leave the mission field because of my disease and whatnot. And for a while I felt so shelved and wondered, you know, what is the Lord doing? And yet I have found we've been able to touch more people's lives with my books all around the world than we ever could have if we had stayed overseas, where I planned on doing something significant for God. And I think that's just beautiful.
Nice. I agree. Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question. We've talked about the benefits that we get as a writer and that the readers can get, et cetera, from these novels that handle tough subjects. Do you feel like everybody should write one of these? Every writer should just kind of pull out their novel that deals with some sort of controversial topic?
Definitely not. No. I mean, there's times when you just want to read something that's an escape from all of the bad stuff in the world. And I think if you're not called to do it, you shouldn't do it. I mean, I go around and do training sessions on fighting human trafficking. And yet I talk to people and say, if God hasn't called you to fight human trafficking, we aren't supposed to do everything there is to do. You're supposed to do what you're told to do and what you're asked to do. And there are certain things that I will not write about. I can't write about. I admit it. I can't write about abortion. I just can't do it. And God hasn't asked me to. Whereas I can write about human trafficking, and I've had people even tell me, I can't read your books because I just can't go there, and that's fine with me. But that's what I've been asked to do, so that's what I do.
Yeah, I started an abortion story. I never got through it. Stopped about halfway. It was, I think, a really incredible story idea, but it became increasingly difficult to write, and that was actually before my Antioch days. So that was before I was not afraid to write what I was afraid of. Okay, so you understand. So you don't think that everybody should. I would maintain that I do think that writers should tackle something that they're afraid of. Maybe not the one thing, but maybe try something that you're afraid of once or twice, if nothing else, just for you to grow as a writer.
Mhm.
and to see how it turns out. I think that scene that I wrote was really, really powerful. Um,
Mhm.
I would have a real tough time trying to put it into the world, but
Mhm.
it is some of the most powerful writing that I've done. It unlocked something, and so I think that you should try it, not necessarily for publication. Please
Ah,
don't
that's the difference.
misunderstand. Yeah,
Yes,
write
writing
it.
it, yes. Getting
Yeah,
it out there, maybe not so much.
yeah, write it for yourself, and then put it in a folder someplace where nobody will ever find it. Burn it if you need to, whatever the case may be. But
Mm.
at
Mm.
least go through the process. I think
Yeah.
you can gain
Okay.
something from it. Maybe not an entire novel. You don't have to do an
Mhm.
entire novel. Um, Definitely maybe a short story. Poem would even work if you want to do a poem, but
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Roll the
Good
sleeves up.
point.
Yeah. So what would you say are the most important things to remember when we're handling these? Like, what should we include, and are there any things that we should avoid?
Well, from the publisher's aspect, they really don't want agenda-driven fiction. So when they hear about a hard issue, they're like, "Oh boy, it's going to be this preachy whatever." And so it's very important. I contacted Deborah Rainey once because she writes about hard issues, and
Mhm.
it was kind of like, "Are publishers still accepting books like this, or is this no?" And she said, "Yes, they are, but you need to make sure the story is king." And so making an exciting story, a romantic story, an interesting story, and you put what you care about in there, but it's not all about everybody should be out, in India fighting human trafficking like the people in my book. It's about the story, not about an agenda. So that's very important. And I would say the other thing, personally, it's very important to me not to glorify the evil. Um, like with trafficking, that's one of the reasons I wrote my series was you could find books about trafficking in novels, but for one, they were I felt dirty reading them. They were telling things that made that the exciting part of the book, made the bad part.
Mhm.
And to me, that is exploitation again. It's making it worse, it's feeding the problem. And I wanted to write about the people who cared and who made a difference so people know that they can read the novel and be aware without being overeducated or being brought into a place they don't want to be. Um, like with child abuse, you don't want to make that the interesting scene of violence. You don't want that to be your exciting part. That's the bad part. That's the terrible thing. You don't want to go there. So for me personally, it's trying very hard to make sure that that's not promoted in my books, and the other things are, so that people can read about the hard issues without coming away oppressed and depressed and feeling like they can't deal with this.
So yeah, so you definitely want to avoid kind of glorifying that evil, but you do want to include enough detail to get the point across, is what I'm hearing from you. But you also don't want to overstate certain things. You want
Well,
to
I mean, like in my
observe
Stolen
the.
series, it's set in India, and the girl she's she's in a brothel in India. But I don't need to take somebody into the room in the brothel in India. Everybody knows what happens there, so you don't need to talk about it. Um, all you need to say is that's where she is and move on. And I would say another thing is putting the thoughts of the people where they're coming from. Like you were saying, the thoughts of even the villain. I think of like your victims. What was it that kept them victimized? What is it that's still keeping them victimized? What are they thinking? So that people in real life are aware of the people around them who are hurting and in need. Maybe they are trapped in ways they don't even understand. And it's a way to help them understand other people's perspectives and even, what to do about it, perhaps. Or maybe some of the people on the sidelines, the things they're thinking that is the reasons they aren't doing anything about it. And people might find themselves in those characters and say, oh my goodness, I'm the one avoiding this. I'm the one who's not dealing with this. Maybe something should change in my own heart and my own mind. That's what I love about stories with lots of different characters, because then people can always find themselves in your books.
So in your novels, do you have a point of view character where do the villains have a point of view character? Obviously, you have the victims in there, and you have some heroes that are on the path of rescue. Do you award, I guess, if I can't find a better term, award a point of view character as a villain, to where the reader can perhaps sympathize a little bit with whatever abuse they may have gone through, or perhaps just understand kind of the nature of the evil within them? Or how do you do that? Do you just avoid that altogether?
I didn't. I did give, like in my Stolen series, the villain does have a point of view. One of the reasons I did that was so that people would know where they're coming from. And as far as raising awareness, kind of understand what they're thinking and how that whole psychological enslavement works as well as physical enslavement. And so that was important to me. What I don't like doing is the kind of villain that you can get into his mind and you start thinking, oh my goodness, I could think like this person, and it starts creeping people out. So I try to keep it very low key because I don't like, going there myself in a book, and so I don't want to take readers there personally. So I give them one, but it's not a very big one.
It's kind of a minor character to become a minor character.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about you? You mentioned that you did it with yours. How do you do that with yours?
In the one scene that I wrote with the child abuse, it was from the victim's perspective, but the dialogue was such that you could understand the motivation of the character. You didn't really see into his past, but you did understand that this is something that he enjoyed, but he also hated himself for enjoying it.
Okay.
And so you saw kind of the self-loathing. You saw exactly how twisted he was and how his sense of logic didn't exactly line up with what other people would call logic. So basically through the course of his actions, the child didn't really fully understand everything, but I think the reader could piece together that this was a broken individual as well. And not excusing by any stretch of the imagination. Never excusing what he's done, but understanding that this is not necessarily something that he was proud of. And so I tried to get to that, and I think that's what made it so chilling, is that I was writing about a victim or a victimizer who was in some way sympathetic. And I think that can be really frightening for a reader to see a villain and to go, wow, I actually feel bad for this person. But I also think that it's, from my perspective, it's almost necessary to encourage that kind of empathy from your reader, not for the villain's actions, but for the villain themselves. Because you mentioned you're writing from a Christian perspective, and I think that you might agree that it's important to pray for the victimizers as well as it is for the victims, that they can find some sort of salvation, some sort of redemption. Not every villain has to be evil for the sake of being evil. And the characters that aren't, the characters that are evil because evil has been enacted upon them, I think are a lot more compelling. And for me, that's kind of the truth that fiction can get at, is that much of the evil in our world stems from other evils.
Yes, people hurt people.
Exactly. Yes, thank you. Hurt people hurt people, and that's, I think. Well, I don't know if I'm perhaps being a little too optimistic about this, but I think in some way, one way that we can all kind of combat some of the evil in the world is by simply enacting kindness. If we cease to hurt people, then those people will not feel the need to hurt others. So, I mean, obviously, it's pie in the sky. It's really kind of altruistic. But
very Sermon on the Mount.
yeah. Part is the soapbox on the mount, but from a writing perspective, remember, and this is what I kind of feel like is the motivation of your character, even though it's evil, what they're doing is evil, they're not doing it to be evil, generally speaking. Yeah.
Okay, I have a comment on that line of thinking, which is basically, as Christians, the Bible passage of whatever is true, noble, right, think on these things. How do you justify writing hard topics about abuse, about victimizers, when as Christians, we're supposed to portray the good light?
That is such.
I'd like your perspective on this. Huh?
That is such a great question. I have thought of that multiple times. Thought, should I not be writing about this? The Bible talks about it's a shame to speak of those things that are done in secret. But then it also talks about the works of evil, bring them into the light and expose them. And so that's where it comes with the not being graphic and not glorifying the evil. To me, talking about the fact that there is abuse can be a good and lovely thing if you are talking about here's how to overcome it. because Jesus didn't avoid the prostitutes. He didn't avoid the tax collectors. He did all kinds of things that people were like, what are you doing hanging out with these people?
Right,
He was saying
right.
the sick people are the ones who need a doctor. And he even said the prostitutes and tax collectors are getting into heaven sooner than a lot of the religious people because they were counting on their little nice, little pretty, made-up, pretend spirituality. So that's where I don't like to go into the villain's mind to the extent that I am standing next to him and saying, you know, I like it here. I kind of like, there's your villain over here, and here's your victim over here, and then I have lots of characters in between. And each one of them has to decide which way they're going to go. Here's the fork in the road. Here's what's happening in the story. Are you going to go the route that this guy went, or are you going to come over here? Like with Shredded, the whole point is freedom in Christ. And so you see this prostitute who becomes totally free, and then everybody else has to realize, wow, I'm enslaved by this or this or this or this. And every one of them has to decide throughout the book if they're going to be free or not. And some of them choose freedom, and some of them choose to stay enslaved. And for me, that's my way of teaching people, I guess you could say, to go toward what is true and lovely and noble and good. But yes, I do struggle with that. And I guess it's good that I struggle with it, because I hope as long as I struggle with it, then I'm not going to go far in the direction that I am dishonoring that scripture. You know what I mean? I've never liked those books that are all like, hey, let's just kill people off all over the place and that'll be fun. And, you know, we'll talk about how he enjoys cutting off people's heads. And no, thank you. I never want to be that kind of writer. I want to be the writer that says, here's the truth, here's the light. We start here in the darkness. Let's go toward the light and, you know, freedom, overcoming, and making a difference.
Nice. I like that.
Now, are you asking me, or are you asking Flannery O'Connor?
Well, I know what Flannery O'Connor has to say about it.
I'm in the same.
So I guess in essence, then I also know what you have to say about it.
There you go. You know me. I'm in Flannery O'Connor's corner. Connor's corner. That's tough to say. I'm in her corner 100%, and that is that oftentimes to get a short-sighted world to see, you have to exaggerate, you have to hyperbolize sometimes. And so that, because she, for those of you who are not aware, was a Catholic writer, and the church came down on her quite a bit for what she wrote about, because she did write about some pretty violent encounters, and the church is saying, you're glorifying this, and she says, no, I'm not. I'm giving the characters a moment of grace. I am hyperbolizing it so that a fallen world can see it and recognize it as fallen. You know, it's one of those things where it becomes harder to see things that we're so used to, and so without using
she believed that we were. She believed that we were immune to it. It was so much in our everyday life that we were immune to it. So she had to blow it up bigger so that it would grab our attention.
Yeah, desensitized, right? It's desensitized, and
yes.
In our culture, even more so than in the culture in which she lived.
Definitely.
We've become desensitized, and so her point was hyperbolize the evil so that people understand that it's evil, and offer those characters a moment of grace. Of course, some take it, some don't. So, but I think that's kind of what you're doing, Kimberly, in the fact that you're actually talking about these things. You're talking about human trafficking when a lot of people still aren't. And you're not necessarily glorifying it, but you are showing an accurate portrayal, perhaps in some places.
I hate it. You know, and so like in Stolen Woman, you've got the girl who goes to fight it, but you've also got the girl who was a victim. There are chapters in there that talk about how she got trafficked and her thinking along the way. She thinks she's going to help her family. She thinks she's going to get this nice job, and then she is deceived. And so part of my thinking is helping, you know, teenage girls who read this understand how a man can deceive them and manipulate them, because over half of, for example, internet is a big way traffickers find victims in the United States. And the average age for a girl to get trafficked in the U.S. is 12 to 14. And they used to go and look for the runaways on the streets, and now they can just get on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and find these vulnerable girls who are looking for love and looking for acceptance and looking for approval, and they can provide what the girl needs. And they say that over half of them, the reason they get their victims is by pretending romantic interest. So I can post on Facebook all day long about that, and it might get through and it probably won't. But if I can write a book, and here's a girl who's looking for acceptance and looking for love and looking for excitement, and here comes this guy on Facebook, and he's everything she's ever wanted, and she has red flags in her spirit, and she knows it's not a smart idea to meet him on her own, but she wants this so much. She wants to be loved so much. And if I can tell a story about finding your worth in Jesus Christ, so you're not looking for your worth in dangerous places, maybe I can stop some girl somewhere along that path before she goes out and meets that guy, you know? And to me, that is walking in the light and, you know, not addressing what would happen if she did get taken, you know, specifically or graphically or explicitly. We don't need to do that. There's no point. I mean, I think of even in the scriptures, like the woman that was caught in adultery and was going to get stoned. The Bible is clear. It says she was caught in adultery in the very act. They don't need to say anything else. I mean, that's all you need to say.
Right.
So that's kind of the way I like to write. There it is, and let's move on to what happens next, you know?
Absolutely. So, well, excellent. Well, the topic was excellent. A good discussion. Not human trafficking is not excellent. I want to be clear about that.
Fighting it is. There you go.
Yeah, fighting it is. So, any last-minute comments about the most important thing to keep in mind if we're tackling an issue like this?
I would say the important thing would be to make a point. You know, I mean, you can write about all these horrible things and it'll be very impacting, but if it doesn't make a point that matters, then what's the point? That's very redundant and repetitive, which is also redundant, but, you know, you get it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much.
You.
Molly, do we have any questions from the room?
We do not have any conversation in the room at this particular moment.
Slow night. That's all right. Yeah. So I do want to remind our listeners, though, our audio... Well, actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor. I keep meaning to add this to the show notes, and I keep forgetting. Hit the like button if you don't mind. The more likes, the better off we are. So if you could like that, we'd appreciate it. And the best compliment that you guys can give us is to recommend us to a friend. So tell a friend or a family member or somebody else, another writer, about our podcast. See if they'll tune in. We'd really appreciate it. Make sure you're subscribing on all your channels. Couple quick reminders. First Line Fridays returns on my Facebook page, my author page, Aaron D. Gansky. So it's facebook.com/Aaron D. Gansky. And tune in on Friday. I'll have one of my first lines. And you can submit one of yours, and then we'll go from there. So, and then tune in on Tuesday nights when I reveal the winner. Also, next week we've got a special kind of an episode. My buddy Dennis Fogoni from Antioch is going to join us. We're going to talk about our favorite endings and why they are our favorite endings, and how we can have similar endings and interesting ways that people have chosen to end their stories in their books. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Pops will be back for that one, assuming he's got his antibiotics and he's back from Kaiser by then.
Good. Let's hope so.
Really, if he's still waiting next week, we've got to talk to Kaiser.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, since he's not here, you can find him at altongansky.com. And BRMCWC is where he does most of his work. Don't forget to pre-order The Fog on Amazon. He'd appreciate that, and it's a good book, so everybody wins. And Kimberly, how can people get in touch with you? And also maybe just a quick plug for your latest book.
Oh, okay. Well, the Lady with the Feather Boas, that's my latest one, so if that sounded interesting. It's called Shredded, and you can get books on Amazon, or they're also on Kindle, or you can order autographed books from KimberlyRae.com, and that's KimberlyRae.com. I would love to sign some for you.
Excellent. And Molly, how about you?
I can be found on my blog, which is franklymydearmojo.com. I finally got my blog up and running again, so we had some technical issues for the better part of the last month, so that's going well. I'm also on Facebook, pretty much all over the internet. You can just search my name, Molly Jo Really. It's R-E-A-L-Y, and you'll find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the blog, Aaron's social media, Kathy Ide's social media, pretty much almost everywhere.
You're a busy lady.
I am. Yeah.
That is a lot of Molly Jo going around. So.
Aaron keeps offering to buy me more plates so I can put more stuff on them.
That's right. I got a whole stack of plates for you. So.
And Aaron, also my books are at Amazon.com. So yes. I have a couple of Kindle books available. The Unemployment Cookbook is my bestseller. And then Aaron, where can they find you?
They can find me on aarongansky.com. That's where I like to hang out, digitally speaking. Also on the Facebook and the Twitter, Aaron D. Gansky, or A.D. Gansky is what you can look up there. Just quick shout out for Molly Joe's Unemployment Cookbook. We got a copy over here as well, and we've been known to make a few of the recipes, and have enjoyed. Is the chili in that book?
Yeah, that's the one.
Famous chili. Every time Molly Joe and I sometimes get together to play nerd games like Magic the Gathering, and she'll bring her chili up, and my boys always want to know. I said, Miss Molly's going to come up and play Magic. Is she bringing her chili? So,
Yeah. They want me to bottle it and sell it at Target. So
I'm telling you, you could.
I'll have
You're
to
gonna have
look
to
into
look
that.
this book up.
Exactly. So, yeah, go ahead and grab a copy of that, and you will be, you and your family will be very pleased with that. So, we do thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.